Nobody noticed the first bag of seed. That was the funny part. They noticed the flowers later. They noticed the bees much later. But the first burlap sack of wildflower seed? Nobody paid attention. Margaret Hale remembered carrying it out of the farm supply store one windy March afternoon. It weighed barely 20 pounds. The cashier smiled. Planting a garden? Margaret shook her head. No. Silence. Then what? She smiled. Ditches. The cashier blinked. Road ditches? Yes. Long pause. Why? Margaret simply loaded the bag into her pickup. You'll see. The Hale farm stretched across 110 rolling acres divided by hedgerows, drainage ditches, and gravel roads. Most farmers viewed those ditches as wasted ground. They mowed them, sprayed them, ignored them. Anything growing there became a problem. Margaret saw something else. Her grandfather Samuel never believed empty ground should stay empty. One July evening when Margaret was 13, she followed him toward a forgotten drainage ditch bordering the north pasture. Instead of weeds, the ditch overflowed with blooming flowers. Purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, milkweed, goldenrod, wild bergamot. Bees drifted from blossom to blossom. The air hummed. Margaret stopped. Grandpa, Samuel smiled. What? Why don't you mow this? He knelt beside a purple flower. Because somebody else is using it. Margaret looked around. I don't see anybody. Samuel pointed upward. Thousands of honeybees floated lazily through the blossoms. They're working. At 13, Margaret thought the flowers were simply pretty. Years later, she realized they were infrastructure. After Samuel passed away, Margaret inherited his beehives. 24 colonies. Nothing enormous. Enough to produce local honey and pollinate nearby orchards. She also inherited his journals. Boxes of them. Weather records. Bloom calendars. Hive inspections. Everything. One notebook fascinated her. Samuel mapped every wildflower bloom around the farm. Month by month. Species by species. One sentence appeared repeatedly. Healthy bees never depend on one field. At first Margaret didn't understand. Eventually she did. Most neighboring farms planted vast stretches of one crop. Soybeans, corn, alfalfa. During bloom, bees thrived. After bloom, food disappeared almost overnight. Samuel solved that problem differently. He planted flowers where nobody expected them. Fence lines, creek banks, road ditches, and used corners. Every forgotten strip of ground became a buffet. Years later, Margaret decided to continue the experiment. The county noticed almost immediately. Naturally, one Saturday morning Dale Harper leaned against the feed store railing. There she goes. Rick looked over. The flower lady? Dale laughed. She bought wildflower seed. Several farmers turned. For a garden? No. Silence. Then what? Ditches. The entire group laughed. One farmer nearly spilled his coffee. She's planting flowers? In drainage ditches? Dale nodded. Apparently. By Monday, everyone knew. The nickname arrived quickly. Flower Margaret. Children loved it. Adults used it even more. Margaret never corrected anyone. Instead, she borrowed an old hand-crank broadcaster from the equipment shed. Every evening she scattered seed along gravel roads, drainage ditches, creek crossings, fence rows, anywhere machinery rarely touched. Nathan Hale watched one evening. He leaned against the pickup. You're doing it again. Margaret smiled. What? The seed. Silence. The seed. That means you've got one of Grandpa's ideas. Long pause. Probably. Nathan laughed. The dangerous kind? Margaret nodded toward the ditch. The patient kind. Spring arrived slowly. Tiny green seedlings appeared. Most looked unimpressive. Almost invisible. Neighbors laughed anyway. One afternoon Dale slowed his truck beside Margaret. She carried another sack of seed. You missed a ditch. Margaret smiled. Not yet. He pointed farther down the road. Plenty left. She laughed softly. I know. Summer transformed everything. The ditches exploded with color. Purple, yellow, white, blue, orange. Wildflowers stretched for miles along the Hale property. Butterflies arrived first. Then native bees. Then honeybees. Thousands of them. The humming became constant. Travelers stopped to photograph the flowers. Children asked their parents why one farm looked different from every other. Margaret simply kept planting. Not everyone appreciated it. Several neighbors complained the flowers looked messy. The county road supervisor even stopped one afternoon. Those flowers are getting tall. Margaret nodded. They're supposed to. You planning to mow? No. Silence. They're in the ditch. Yes. Long pause. People like neat. Margaret looked across hundreds of blooming stems alive with bees. The bees don't. The supervisor drove away shaking his head. By late summer, something unexpected happened. Margaret's honey production increased. Not dramatically, steadily. Every inspection revealed strong brood patterns. Healthy queens. Heavy nectar stores. Nathan noticed first. These hives look different. Margaret nodded. They're busy. They always were. She smiled. Not like this. One September afternoon, a university extension beekeeper visited several local apiaries. He agreed to stop by Margaret's farm after hearing about the wildflower ditches. Mostly out of curiosity. For nearly 3 hours he inspected colonies. Frame by frame. Hive by hive. Finally he closed the last hive. Then looked across the flower-filled roadside. This is unusual. Margaret folded her arms. Good unusual? He nodded slowly. Yes. Silence. What do you see? He smiled. Continuous forage. Margaret waited. He pointed toward the flowers. Most colonies experience feast, then famine. Long pause. Yours never stop eating. That sentence stayed with her. Because unlike everyone else, he wasn't talking about flowers. He was talking about survival. Autumn arrived. Goldenrod bloomed when nearly every crop had already faded. Then asters. Then late wildflowers. Margaret's bees continued gathering pollen weeks after neighboring colonies slowed. The beekeeper returned once more before winter. Again he smiled. These colonies are going into winter heavier than almost any I've seen. Nathan looked surprised. Heavier? The beekeeper nodded. More honey. Better nutrition. Healthier workers. Margaret smiled. Good. He looked toward the blooming ditches one final time. Very good. Winter passed quietly. Most hives survived. As expected. Then spring returned. Along with something nobody anticipated. Reports began spreading across the county. Weak colonies. Poor brood. Queen failures. Entire apiary struggling. Nobody understood why. By early May, beekeepers gathered at the feed store discussing unexpected hive losses. Some blamed weather. Others blamed mites. Some blamed bad luck. Margaret listened quietly. She said very little. Then one morning, she opened her own hives. Frame after frame overflowed with healthy bees. Queens laid beautiful brood patterns. Fresh nectar already filled new comb. Nathan walked beside her. Ours look perfect. Margaret nodded. They do. Neither of them realized that within a few short weeks, nearly every commercial beekeeper in the county would come asking the same question. How had her bees survived when almost everyone else's hadn't? The news spread slowly. Then all at once, one beekeeper lost 4 colonies. Another lost 9. A commercial operator outside town reported nearly half his hives had collapsed before summer. Nobody could explain why. Some blamed the unusually wet spring. Others blamed mites. Some blamed pesticides. Most simply admitted they didn't know. Meanwhile, Margaret opened hive after hive. Strong queens. Healthy brood. Frames heavy with nectar. Workers returning with bright yellow and orange pollen baskets packed on their legs. Nathan looked across the apiary. Ours don't even seem stressed. Margaret nodded. They've never stopped eating. That sentence lingered in the quiet morning air. A week later, the university extension beekeeper returned. This time he brought 2 entomologists and a pollinator specialist. Not because they doubted Margaret. Because they wanted answers. For nearly 6 hours they inspected every colony. They sampled brood. Counted mites. Measured honey stores. Collected pollen. Compared flowering plants. Everything. Finally, one entomologist closed his notebook. Then smiled. I think we found it. Margaret folded her arms. What? He pointed toward the roadside ditch overflowing with purple coneflowers and blooming wild bergamot. Nutrition. Silence. The pollinator specialist nodded. Not just quantity. She knelt beside a flowering aster. Diversity. Nathan frowned. Meaning? The specialist looked toward the surrounding countryside. Most bees around here spent months eating from 1 or 2 crops. She pointed back toward Margaret's farm. Your bees never depended on a single bloom. The extension beekeeper smiled. They had something flowering almost every week. Margaret looked across the colorful ditches. Samuel had known, long before anyone else. The researchers continued studying the property for several more days. They mapped every flowering species. Early spring blooms. Summer blooms. Late autumn blooms. More than 60 different flowering plants supported the bees throughout the season. The report surprised everyone. The flowers weren't just feeding honeybees. They supported native bees, butterflies, hoverflies, beneficial wasps. The entire pollinator community had quietly expanded. One afternoon, Dale Harper stopped beside the mailbox. He removed his cap. "I need to ask you something." Margaret smiled. "Go ahead." He looked almost uncomfortable. "My bees." Long pause. "I've lost 7 hives." Margaret nodded quietly. "I'm sorry." He looked toward the flowering ditch. "Do you really think the flowers made that much difference?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to a blooming patch of bee balm. Hundreds of bees worked peacefully among the blossoms. Some honeybees, some native bees, others she couldn't even identify. Finally, she smiled. "I think they were never hungry." Dale stared at the flowers. For the first time, he wasn't laughing. By midsummer, the County Agricultural Association organized a special meeting. Not about honey, not about flowers, about survival. Every seat filled. Commercial beekeepers, orchard owners, farmers, researchers. Everyone wanted answers. The association president welcomed Margaret to the front. She looked as uncomfortable as ever. Public speaking had never interested her. The president smiled. "Tell us what you did." Margaret looked around the crowded room, then answered honestly. "I planted flowers." Laughter drifted through the audience. Not mocking, nervous. Someone finally raised a hand. "No, seriously." Margaret nodded. "I am serious." Silence. Then she explained. "Not expensive flowers. Not ornamental gardens. Native species. Blooming in sequence. Early spring. Late spring. Summer. Autumn. Always something available. Always another source of pollen. Always another nectar flow." One orchard owner stood. "How much land did it take?" Margaret smiled. "Almost none." The room grew quiet. She continued. "Ditches. Fence rows. Creek banks. Corners nobody farmed anyway." Another beekeeper raised his hand. "You mean?" He paused. "All this time we've been mowing the very places our bees needed?" Margaret nodded gently. "I think so." Nobody spoke for several moments. Because everyone knew exactly how many miles of roadside they had kept perfectly trimmed every summer. The following autumn looked different. Pickup trucks loaded with wildflower seed began leaving the feed store. The cashier laughed one morning. "You started something." Margaret smiled. "I hope so." Nathan drove through the county that October. Every few miles, another roadside ditch had been freshly seeded. Some farmers planted milkweed. Others planted asters. Many simply copied Margaret's original mix. Color slowly returned to places that had been plain grass for decades. The county road supervisor even changed mowing schedules after meeting with university researchers. Instead of cutting every ditch repeatedly through summer, crews delayed mowing until after major flowering periods. By the second year, butterflies seemed everywhere. Monarchs floated across pastures. Native bumblebees appeared in numbers many older farmers hadn't seen since childhood. Songbirds followed. The landscape felt different. Alive. One spring morning, the extension beekeeper returned again. This visit required no measurements. He simply stood beside Margaret's apiary watching thousands of bees leave their hives. The humming filled the warm morning air. He smiled. "You know?" Margaret looked over. "What?" "We spent years looking for complicated answers." Silence. Then, and he pointed toward a blooming ditch where countless bees worked peacefully among purple and yellow flowers. The answer was growing beside the road. That sentence found its way into agricultural magazines across the region. Soon universities used Margaret's farm as a demonstration site. School groups visited. County conservation districts distributed native seed mixes. Even neighboring counties began changing roadside management. One evening, Nathan stood beside Margaret, overlooking the farm. The setting sun painted the wildflower ditches in shades of gold, purple, and orange. Thousands of bees drifted lazily from bloom to bloom. The sound reminded Margaret of childhood evenings walking beside Samuel. Nathan folded his arms. "You know what still bothers me?" Margaret smiled. "What?" "They called you Flower Margaret." "Yes. For years." "I know." "They laughed every time you carried another bag of seed." Margaret looked across the hills. Bright ribbons of wildflowers now stretched far beyond her own property. Other farmers had planted them too. Road after road glowed with color. She smiled. They weren't laughing at the flowers. Nathan looked puzzled. What then? They couldn't imagine something so small making such a big difference. The wind carried the sweet scent of blooming clover across the pasture. Honeybees moved steadily from flower to flower. Calm, healthy, busy, exactly as Samuel remembered them. Years earlier, one small burlap sack of wildflower seed had left the farm supply store unnoticed. Neighbors thought Margaret was planting pretty roadside decorations. They joked about messy ditches. They questioned why anyone would waste seed on land that produced no crops. They saw flowers. Margaret saw food. They saw weeds. She saw a calendar that kept blooming from spring until frost, when disease, poor nutrition, and environmental stress weakened colonies across the county. Her bees faced the season differently. They never experienced long weeks without diverse forage. They never depended on a single crop. They simply moved from one bloom to the next, exactly as nature intended. And in the end, the greatest harvest Margaret Hale ever grew wasn't corn, hay, or honey. It was resilience. Scattered one handful of wildflower seed at a time along the forgotten ditches everyone else drove past without ever truly seeing.